feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks and coming at you Tuesday morning. It's December 31st. And the plan here today for our last episode of 2024 is in great cliche fashion to look back at the year of 2024. I figured with the Wolves playing the Thunder literally tonight in like 9 hours from when we're recording this, and Britt and I are doing an episode tomorrow, so we'll be able to kind of talk about that game, that it would make sense to sort of zoom out a bit and reflect on the year of 2024. So I have Wolves beat writer Chris Hine from the Star Tribune here with me, and the homework assignment, or the way I presented this to Chris, was I'm not even totally sure of how I presented it.
Homework is fitting because I'm propping up the laptop today on a bunch of my dad's calculus and pre-calculus books from his time as a teacher. I'm home in Pennsylvania where my family is. By the way. That's the setting today. Yes, no hotel room, no nothing, but no apartment. I'm actually in my hometown today.
Where you did homework. Okay, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Right.
So the way I said it to you, and you were like, okay, I'm in. I was like, let's just think of each come up with like 5 stories or memories or things from 2024 that happened that that'll just be worth kind of remembering, or maybe digging into like some of the details around. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about Game 7 or something like that.
Surprise! One of mine was Game 7. Yes.
Yeah. So that's just for the listeners. That's what we're going to kind of do. Is we're going to kind of bounce back and forth and just go through, stories, memories, highlights, whatever's of 2024. But I don't know. You want to give me your first one?
Do you want to start with Game 7? Or do you want to end with Game 7? What do you think?
Start with it. That's probably like that's the biggest.
Okay.
That's probably the biggest.
Yeah, all right. Game 7, then we'll get to some of the more maybe not obvious ones. So my memories of Game 7 were, I just remember at halftime writing the dirge, quote unquote, which was they're down 15.5, and I'm getting the losing game story ready. Right. That's what you do in this business. Like, you don't wait for the result to roll in when you're writing ahead of time, whether you think the team is going to win or going to lose. And sometimes you have to change it.
Right.
And nobody ever sees that other draft that was written. And so I remember sitting there at halftime, and I started it. Like, I started writing I must have had maybe 400 words written, and I write about, I would say maybe halfway through the third quarter or 3/4 way through the third quarter, I was like, might have to shelve this for a little bit. Let's start getting something new going here. And that something new was like, well, if they come back and win, it's like the greatest win in franchise history. So
should be prepared for that.
Probably should be prepared for that too, right?
Yeah.
I remember that. I remember the locker room afterwards just being like this kind of, I don't want to say chaotic scene, but like there's so much media in there, and it's not a big space, and everybody's just kind of, all the players just kind of holding court at their lockers, so to speak.
I got crushed in the head by a boom mic from TNT. I remember that specifically. I was like, what are we doing? Like, it was right in front of Rudy Gobert, and he's like, are you okay?
Right. I do remember that. Yeah.
Can I say before we move to the locker room, just because you're doing this, I sit by you at like every game, right? And I'm seeing you. I've seen you do the thing, and you've multiple times before been like, well, got to throw away this story that I've been typing up the whole time. And but for me, it was different because in the playoffs, I'm doing episodes that night. So I'm not filing at the buzzer, but like, I don't have the time to wait until, the morning to kind of put together my stuff. It's like, I got to go do the interviews, and then we're doing a podcast right afterwards. And I remember my moment like that was at the timeout that was 38-58.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I need to do like the season is over, which we're just both so scrambling through the playoffs. That's just how it goes. And I was like, oh man, like, okay, I guess. And I literally, for probably the beginning of that beginning of that comeback, I'm starting to list off bullet points of like actually kind of doing this, like recapping the season, what happened in 2024, that sort of stuff. And then they came back from literally 38 to, to 58. And then the story did kind of just write itself, right? Like once we get to the locker room and all that to continue. But yeah, go ahead.
I remember like the remember berries from South Park. Remember the time remember that. I remember Mike Conley just kind of standing there in kind of awe at what had just happened. And when that happens with Mike, somebody who's been around for so long, it's a really special moment, because he was just like, he's shaking his head and he's like, he's looking around the room at like all these young guys, at Ann, at Naz, Jaden. He's like, I don't think these guys realize what they just did. Right. Like I like that quote was the one that really stuck out to me. It's like, here's a 17-year veteran who's just like, this has never happened before. I don't think these guys even realize how rare what they just did is. And that was a quote to me that kind of encapsulated that moment. I felt like.
Yeah, I remember him. He was that far corner across the way, like right by the showers. He was kind of like off to his side, and then Ant was over that direction. So everybody was kind of like cluttered over there.
Over towards Ant. Like, some of us were just kind of hanging out with Mike for a minute, and he was just like shaking his head, like couldn't believe what had just happened.
I remember, I don't know, obviously, like when you walked into the locker room the year before. So obviously the season ends in Denver in that same locker room, 12 months prior. And I remember when I walked into that locker room the year before, April 2023, I walked in and Ant is like literally in mid Gronk spike of his cell phone. Yeah. And what it's been like when we've been in the locker room many times when after the Wolves have, lost a game, and there's like some frustration from Ant, but he normally, he has to do media or he's talked to somebody. He often turns into like smiling or even like making jokes after like regular season ones. And that was the first time, again, in that 2023 season where I was like, whoa, he is angry, and that moment stood out to me when I walked into that locker room after Game 7, and he's literally sitting in the same spot there, and probably to your point or to Mike's point, not even really understanding what he did, but having literally overcome that or cross that barrier in a year. I do think, that in 5-10 years or whatever, when I think about Game 7, I'll think about the locker room was the scene there too, but also the fans. Remember, like
the fans were great. I mean, off in that little corner there, like behind the bench, like they were loud. They were, they were a vocal presence in that arena for that game, and I definitely think they added to the energy of the comeback for sure. I love the moment where and it's in the book. I have a little bit of this Ant pointing to the guy in the front row after he hits the corner three.
Oh yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite moments of last postseason, where Ant just turns and he just has to say for 5 seconds, "Where you at, huh? Where you at?" And a few other things. Like just in the middle of Game 7 of a playoff series, he took the time to address that. And it was Game 7. I think it goes almost without saying, but that was Karl's shining moment I think in his Timberwolves career. And
hip dunk. Yeah.
It's the way he played and carried them in that first half, the way he held up his own on Jokic when they needed him to. That was his greatest game as a Timberwolf.
Yeah. That was. Yeah, it all just kind of came together. To the fan part, I remember when so Finch is still like in full leg immobilizer. He's got his like crutches thing. And we went over to that press conference where the press conferences were there, but it was kind of clear it was going to take Finch a while. He was going into the locker room, so it was going to be about 10 minutes. So he came over to do it with us. And I went back out to the floor there, and I thought it was really cool that like all the Wolves fans that wherever they were in the stands kind of all congregated behind the Wolves bench there. And there was probably a couple 3,000 maybe, I don't know, Wolves fans that were at that game and had kind of all congregated there behind the Wolves bench. Even once the floor had cleared and everything, it was just kind of like, you know, I'm assuming all these people all excited. They're just like, well, I'm going to be excited with this other person who's also wearing a Wolves jersey. It was a very cool experience. And I think both were lucky to be there.
The trips to Denver, honestly, late in the season just blurred together for me at that. I think in because they played them twice there late in the regular season, I think from like March onward. Mm-hmm. And so 5 separate trips to Denver over the course of about 2 months. I was done with the Denver airport. I'm done with the Denver airport in general. I was really done with it after game 7.
It's not good. It's like, yeah, there was the 2 late regular season ones, and that was one of those was when all the ownership stuff hit the fan,
and then the second one was for all the 1 seed implications and all that stuff. It was a whirlwind. It was fun. It was a whirlwind, and it was exhausting.
It was,
but it was a lot of fun.
I don't know. I don't have mine like ordered in any sort of way. But
all right, what's your next one?
I thought about the Rudy flashing the money sign in Cleveland.
Yeah.
I know that's not like a positive one, but
I did not have that one on my bingo card.
Well, it was
yeah.
Part of the reason was it was the very rare road game that I've covered that you weren't there.
That I wasn't at. That's right. Yeah. You were there.
And it was me and Britt, like big J journalists coming in to break down what is going on here and it was just I guess it's like kind of funny to laugh about now, but I was looking at I was like, what did he say again? I have this up on the screen. I found this. And it goes, I think everyone in the league knows, and I think it's got to get better. I'll bite the bullet again. I'll be the bad guy that speaks what I think is the truth. And hopefully the league, they're probably going to fine me. And once again, I'll take the fine. But I think it's hurting our game. We shouldn't. I know the betting and all that is becoming bigger and bigger, but it shouldn't feel that way. And I'll give all my respect to the other team, to Cleveland. They played a hell of a game, but just let the players decide the game. Dude, it was a crazy locker room. I remember talking to him afterwards. But I don't think I've shared this before. So Scott Foster was the referee, and I remember being in the back hallways and going to the locker room, and he was getting like police escorts out of there. I don't think that's always the way it works with officials, but that was definitely
I was gonna say, how many was it? Like a car and like
no, just like body, not like out of the stadium.
Referees do have security escort them in and out of the arenas. That's standard.
There was extra,
protocol,
man.
But there was extra.
I don't know. It seemed like it to me. Or maybe I'm saying that in my head, but they were for sure flanked by like a wall of Cleveland PD's finest.
No, but if it was like police and like several police, then that's different. Well, you see the referees coming in and out of Target Center with like with like 1 or 2 officers or security personnel like with them at all times that they're moving through the arena.
Yeah, I think I've seen I've seen that at Target Center when they come in that door by the media room kind of. But I don't know. It was just like. And I'm sure you feel this way too. It's not sometimes when we're covering games, obviously we remember the wins and the fun stuff like that too. But it is for me, the ones I remember are just like where the big stuff happens, and something, that was definitely something big there. And it was also like right at this sort of critical juncture of the season. That was their second game they played after the cat injury. The game the night before that was in Indiana. I did that road trip, Indiana, Cleveland. And it was kind of like this feeling of, well, the season's over. Carl hurt his meniscus. And then Ant in Indiana hits his head on the rim. blocking that shot to seal the game. And then it's the very next night in Cleveland, the Rudy money sign game. And I know just the story of that 2-game trip really, when I was just like kind of scrolling through, like, I'm like, what from last year? I was like, I'll remember that. I mean, game 7 for sure in the playoffs, but that was a unique one I'll remember.
I wish I was on that. I mean, I had to, for budgetary reasons, had to cut some out. And that was a weird road trip because it started in Indiana and Cleveland, and then it snaked to the West Coast,
right?
Which doesn't usually happen. It was LA, then Utah. Yeah. And actually that kind of segues into one of mine because this was on that same road trip.
Let me grab our first. Let me grab our break here first because I think you're gonna. Yeah. I think I know what direction you're going to go with that. But we'll grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company, and I was thinking for Thursday, Wolves Celtics. That's one of those that makes sense to go out and watch with others. As you all know who listen to this. We're telling you about Falling Knife all the time, and they're showing every game with the sound on in the tap room, and Wolves fans are gathering there. But I'm figuring for a Thursday night for playing against the Celtics, that's a game that would be a lot of fun to watch with others if you're not going to Target Center to watch that game. So as always, we just want Falling Knife on your radar, and kind of all January, all winter here when you're kind of sometimes might need a reason to get out and go somewhere. Falling Knife is always an option for for Wolves games or just other nights, happy hour, friends, weekends, whatever. We love Falling Knife, longtime sponsor, Northeast Minneapolis. Keep that on your radar. And then our other sponsor today is Prize Picks, and I was just quickly looking at the slate for today's games, or today's game, Wolves Thunder, later this evening. I'm really curious in this game about how much the Wolves are able to sort of impose their size. And I think if they are able to do that in that game, I'm going to say Rudy Gobert has more than 22.5 points plus rebounds plus assists. I have Isaiah Hartenstein having more than an 11.5 rebounds. I'm going to say Jalen Williams, I would assume, is going to guard Randall. I'm going to say he gets less than 5.5 rebounds on there. So that's my little slate for that game. But there's, if you're listening to this afternoon and you want, you're going to be watching Wolves Thunder tonight, you can check out they got a whole bunch of different stuff. Is DiVincenzo going to keep going, keep rolling that way? Is Ant going to bounce back? You can put together any sort of slate and obviously mix it together with other sports. But that's prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app. If you use the promo code Dane, they will credit your account with $50 when you place your first $5 lineup. All right, Chris, give me Utah.
So the Utah trip was the John Collins dunk that Ant had. And I just remember that day being an interesting one because it kind of started with, I talked to him at Shoot Around for a story that ran during the playoffs about kind of his emotional sort of leadership on the team, as a 22-year-old on a team with much older people. And he was kind of the emotional fulcrum, so to speak, of that team, and still is, of the franchise. And it's like on display, like later that night, like when you make a huge dunk like that, and it just, because they were like losing that game. I don't know if you remember that, but they were down double digits in that game to Utah, and they came back and won by about 10. But that dunk had a big part of it because it was just such a seismic shift in the arena that night. Like, just, I've never experienced anything like that, like on the road, a road crowd like reacting to something like that. And just the aftermath of it was just, I've never seen. Ant sprints off the floor because he dislocated a finger. So like as a beat writer, you're like, okay, he just had this monster dunk, but he just sprinted off the floor and into the locker room. What the hell just happened? So there's like a lot of things going through your head at that moment.
And it was a real injury. He actually dislocated his finger. There's been plenty of times where Ant goes to the locker room and it's not
he comes back in and finishes the game, obviously. And then the thing I remember about that was I have never seen, and I wrote about it, if you go back and look at the story, I've never seen a post-game locker room like that one, because everybody was just still in awe of what they had seen on the dunk, and I think the dunk took place in like
I was going to ask, do you
third
remember?
quarter.
Yeah, it wasn't like
it wasn't late in the game.
It wasn't the fourth. It wasn't the fourth.
Yeah. I think it was the second half because they were definitely in front of the Wolves bench, and they always play offense on the road in front of the Wolves bench. So I think it was the third quarter. Sorry, we're here. You're hearing the ambiance of the Hine household right now.
There we go.
We got the dog going. We got the doorbell going. We got my mom scrambling to go get the door. I knew this was going to happen at some point. Right. There goes my mom. Yeah, there we go. Say hi to Mrs. Hine.
We are definitely leaving this
YouTube viewers. Oh, here comes my dad too. Now we got the whole crew coming. Come on, say hi, Dad. Let's go. Come on, you're here. So well, there's my dad. Yep. All right. It was inevitable. I tried to tell him to stay in the other room and shut up and don't watch TV. But they
literally
inevitably didn't happen.
There we go.
Yeah,
in my own house.
All right, Dad. Thank you.
Hello.
I'm back.
He's back.
Yes, we're leaving this all in, right? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That might be my next one on my list of 2024 memories.
Anyway, the locker room was like a bunch of little kids who had just kind of seen something crazy happen, right? Like that was the vibe, and I've never seen anything like it. Really never seen anything like it. Like from Mike to Jaden to Kyle to Nikhil, everybody was just like, do you believe it? I was over here. I saw this angle of it. I saw that angle of it. It's like, and Kyle Anderson's quote was like, have y'all ever seen a dead body before? Like that was his quote. Nikhil was just like, I could tell my grandkids that I had the assist, like it was that kind of mood. Like, and I just remember the kind of juxtaposing with what I had talked to him about earlier in the day about being like this emotional leader on the team, and it was like nobody could have an effect like that, like the way he could. And then he himself, like Ant, was just like, yeah, that was the greatest dunk of my career, wasn't it? Yeah. Like that.
Did you take a video of him looking at it?
I did, yes.
Right? I feel like I remember that.
Yeah, so the post-game interview was like with Bally was like the first time he had seen it. And so they had a monitor off to the side as he was watching it. And
he was giddy.
He was super excited. Yeah. Super excited. And never really seen him react that way to a play of his before. It was a fun moment. Like in the course of the regular season, you have like there's plenty of blah kind of games that don't stick out, that aren't memorable, and this was one that I think I'll remember for a long time, that night in Utah.
That's a great one, and it's cool. You were the only. I mean, you were there. It's cool. You were there. My next one is Naz Reid winning Sixth Man of the Year. And kind of that just that's like a crazy story on a lot of levels. Just like from the we both covered Naz his whole career, right? Like he was our first or second year, whatever it was, on the beat. Like he was Jalen Clark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or Daisha Nix, or he was on a two-way contract. And just if and I hope the best for Jalen Clark or Daisha Nix or Luke Carson, that the guys that are Jesse Edwards that are on two-way contracts. But just think about the idea that how crazy it would be if in 5 years from now, if Jalen Clark or Jesse Edwards or Daisha Nix won Sixth Man of the Year. Like that in and of itself is crazy. That's a crazy progression. The way he obviously has, and we've talked about this up and down in every direction, the connection he's made to the fan base, his style of play, his effort, the way he changed his body. It's like, it was all a really cool, I think for me too, like a capstone of getting to that point of a level that it would have been really hard for anybody else to have like envisioned him getting to. And it happened like late in this. There we go.
I'm gonna mute this. Continue.
Yeah. It happened late in the season too, where he was like, when Cat got hurt, it seemed extremely unlikely that, Naz Reid would even be in the conversation for it. It was kind of like Malik Monk's award to lose, but Cat gets hurt. Naz starts playing more, starts starting a little bit, which gets like boosts his stats. But it really was kind of a late push photo finish. And I just thought like it was, having been there covering Naz the entirety of his career, it was really cool to see that kind of culminate for him. And I'll remember that. And I remember that game in Cleveland too. He had 34 points. He blocked Darius Garland at the end of regulation. Obviously, they lose that game, the money sign, all that stuff. But that was like, all right, Naz is ready to take on something more here. He began starting after that game, and really was deserving because he helped really fuel the Wolves' push at the end of the year and not fall off without Cat. I thought Naz Reid's 6 Man of the Year story was awesome last year.
It was the perfect culmination of a lot of things in his career. The way he changed the way that he played defense, his role on the team, moving from a 5 to more of a 4. The way that people tried to dock him for starting a lot of games, right? And I never understood that, because what is a 6-man supposed to do but start in a pinch when another starter is hurt, right? Like, because it really was the definition of a 6th man, right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. He started 14 games. Like that's kind of like the role.
That is the role. That is a 6th man. What is a 6th man if not a 6th starter in case another starter goes down?
Right.
So, as somebody who's voted on the NBA awards, I would never dock somebody for starting in place of another injured starter.
Right, if he got moved into the starting lineup. If he got
moved into the starting lineup, right, exactly. That's a different story. But if a starter is out and he suddenly becomes the starter, that is seemingly the 6th man. I never understood that line of argument from people online. So I thought it was just a great achievement for him. I know he really wanted it. Like he was, the team was obviously behind trying to get it, and that was a very close vote. I don't think people realize, we kind of commented on it at the time, but I don't think people realize that was about as close as an NBA awards vote gets. Like, I think it was like 2 points.
Right. Yeah.
That was the difference. So every vote, every first place vote he got, every second place vote, every third place vote, or if they got left off of a ballot, it mattered in that race to get him that 6 Man of the Year award. You rarely see NBA awards voting come down to that few votes.
No, that's a good. I even forgot about that. I mean, I knew it was close-ish, but it really was like a razor's edge sort of thing.
It really was, yeah. So it was a cool moment for him. And when his story and all that he went through, and obviously we talked about his mentor on here when I wrote that story. During the TNT interview, he thanked, he kind of said a posthumous thank you to Rudy Roundtree, one of his mentors who passed away a few years ago, and in a few weeks his old high school is going to be retiring his jersey, so I hope to write something from there as well. When
we're out in New York before the Cat versus Wolves game too. You got another one?
Let's see, let me pull out the list here. I was gonna go. Let's go back to the playoffs for a second here. I'm just gonna talk about the craziness that was Game 4 in Phoenix as well, which is kind of an underrated crazy moment. Finch getting tackled by Mike Conley and having to leave the game. Again, sitting in the arena where we were sitting, which was maybe halfway up the lower bowl. I was sitting where, I don't know if you were sitting with us.
I was with Britt and Kyle, not in the same area that you and Jace were, but I had an angle of it too.
Jason and I were sitting next to each other, so we're looking down, and we had no idea what had happened. right? Like it's very hard to see. It was very hard to see what had happened. All we see is like this high level of concern. Like I'll admit, I thought at first like Finch collapsed or somebody like collapsed. It was like that level of concern where you're like, oh shit, somebody like fainted.
Right.
Like that's what I thought initially had happened. That somebody had just.
It kind of was that vibe. It was
right.
Like
it was
silent,
it was very serious
in
in the arena for a few minutes there, and then obviously you see him kind of. They help him up and they kind of get him up and you know he's taken out of the arena. But I also remember like just a few behind the scenes moments of that. You know, Micah does the press conference. We've got. I remember Finch. After kind of all the craziness had ended, Finch comes zooming by in the cart. We're like walking out of one of the media rooms or something like that. And I remember I was standing with Jason. I don't know if you were there too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
But Jason, we're coming out of the media room and Finch comes zooming by in the cart. And Finch just goes, and he must have been hopped up on painkillers or something. Yeah. I don't know. He goes, hey guys, how's it going?
And at this point, we still have no idea what the injury is.
We still have no idea what the injury is.
We know it's like an injury at that point. Yeah, but
and he's just being part of, hey guys, what's going on?
I remember that. Well, they literally they won the series that night. Right, like that's the thing too. That was a sweep. It was game 4. It was like the whole like. Remember, it was like Ant and Cat. And Tim Connolly like had their like arms around each other because they wanted. It's like, yeah, we did this. And then they're walking down that hallway where the whole team is going to like see Finch, who's in that little back room there. Yeah. Where it would have been like this like kind of celebration. It was like celebration quickly turned into like concern.
But overall celebration. It was still. I mean, he was obviously still in a lot of pain, but in high spirits. Yeah. One way or the other after that. And then I just remember the cart kind of zoomed by and Ant was like in the back tunnel, like with some of his people and friends, and the cart goes, and I think Finch might have stopped the cart for a second to say something to Ant. And I remember just, you know, they were all smiles and they were all just, it was like, you know, it seemed like a pretty cool moment between Ant, his crew, and a very injured Chris Finch in that moment. Again, nothing ever happens normally. Like it's just like, okay, they win their first playoff series in forever, but the coach just had his knee blown up. Like, how does that happen?
2024 was wild. Last season was really legit wild. Because,
and by the way, going back to your Cleveland thing, Finch missed that game because of an illness, and so Micah, and that was the first game that Micah had to coach from the sidelines. That was the dress. That was the dress rehearsal for. Little did they know that was the dress rehearsal for what was to come in the postseason.
Yeah, it was like, I think maybe did Finch like coach the first quarter of that? No, Finch did the pregame presser with us. He did do the pregame.
And then he was out. And then he was out.
Yes, that's what it was. But he was there. He was there and it was just like, no, I'm sick. I gotta go.
Listen, sometimes you gotta go. Sometimes you gotta go when it hits you, right?
Let me grab another break here. Then I got a couple more. Today's show is also brought to you by Doer Jeans, DUER. I love my Doer jeans. I've been telling y'all about them. It was a great Christmas present, I think, to give somebody else in your life. But these jeans are the most comfortable ones I own. And it's not all like denim jeans. They got all different styles, looks of them. I wear them all the time. They're seriously so comfortable. I've been recommending them to friends and family members. I really would recommend getting yourself a late Christmas present and trying these out. They're good. They're comfortable jeans, and they're made the right way. Doer is committed to sustainability. They use recycled materials and plant-based fibers, which also, that's a good way to make clothes, but they also it helps make them a little bit more naturally breathable, soft, and they have that moisture absorption. Seriously, I think you'll love the Doers as much as I do. You can check out their flagship stores if you live in LA or Denver, which I know actually some of you have. I get like a little picture. They're like, hey, Doer. You can check that out if you live in LA or Denver. But you can, for those of you in Minnesota or elsewhere, You can shop online at shopdoer.com/DaneMoore. Remember, it's Doer, D-U-E-R. But right now, my listeners get 20% off their first purchase when they use my exclusive URL, shopdoer.com/DaneMoore. It's in the show notes. Seriously, this is a great deal. Don't wait to get 20% off. Go now to shopdoer.com/DaneMoore. All right, so I'm up, right, Chris?
Yes, because I just went with Phoenix game 4. Yes.
This isn't a moment, but not only being the number one defense, but being the number one defense by like a mile, and really growing like my own individual appreciation of what elite defense like looks like in the NBA. There's so much, there's just a lot in the NBA that isn't a real point of emphasis. Very few teams in the 2020s, I feel like, make defense their identity. And I think even fewer make defense their identity and have success through it. I was just like looking at it before, they had a 108.9 defensive rating. Number 2 was 111.5. So was that like 2.6? 2.6 difference. So that would be the gap between the Wolves and Orlando at 2 is the same as the gap between Orlando and Philadelphia at 11. Like they were seriously a mile better at defense than anybody in the league last year. And it was cool to just kind of watch that story over the course of the season and see them lean into it. Really, we were still kind of like, Finch is an offensive guy. It was like, no, like last season was like Finch and his staff is prioritizing defense. Rudy, obviously. But that's going to go down as one of the best defenses, I don't know, of the 2020s, probably for sure. Right. When you talk about some of the, the best defensive teams, like the Wolves will definitely be, are part of that lore. I don't necessarily have like a specific moment, like win an award for that or anything. But they were proud of that. And they called that, Timberwolves basketball. That was Carl's line all the time. Right. And they really did buy into believing that. And I think that's NBA or whatever. It's pretty rare in today's world to be like, we're a team that is committed to defense. We're going to actually do it. And we're going to win because of that. When I remember 2024, I'll remember the Wolves being honestly, particularly the second half of the season, which was the beginning of 2024, how special of a defensive team it was. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. The dog noise.
There we go. Yeah, the dog was here, so I had to make sure that wasn't over the mic. What I think I appreciated about the defense was just the nightly effort and focus that it took, because there were moments in the middle of the season when their schedule got crazy. And I remember that their schedule got really crazy in January last year. That was a time when there was a lot of travel back and forth, both coasts. And I think as a result of those miles accumulating at that point in the season, their defense suffered a little bit, just because I think they were wearing out from the travel a little bit. And I think that plays a part, or that played a part ultimately, I think, in their demise to Dallas. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but I think the energy and the effort with which they had to play defense on a nightly basis was ultimately, they just didn't have it in the tank in the Dallas series at that level. Like we saw it early in the Denver series, right? Like game 2 against Denver is probably, if you're going to show film of the 2024 Minnesota Timberwolves defense, it's that game. And the ironic thing about that game is that Rudy Gobert wasn't there. The defensive player of the year wasn't there, and they still turned in a defensive performance for the ages that night.
You know what that just made me think of? You remember the made up pilot who said he was flying Rudy back for game 2 of that game? Do you remember that? I think his name was Pilot Dan.
I never acknowledged Pilot Dan or whoever that was, because I was like, this guy could be just grifting everybody now on Twitter, and he totally was.
Oh man, I forgot about that.
Oh my god,
Pilot Dan before game 2.
That's subplot of that day. Everybody's on flight tracker and like, maybe this is the flight, maybe this is the flight, maybe this is the flight, and it turned out none of them were the flight. And then they blew him out by 30 that night. Like that was unreal.
Pilot Dan.
But it's just that's okay. This podcast is off the rails in many ways today. But I think that's one of the best things that you admire about the team is that they did that night in and night out, that they came to show up every night of the regular season and tried and largely succeeded playing with that sort of energy, effort, focus, attention to detail on a nightly basis to get the record that they did. And ultimately, when they ran into Denver and it was a 7-game slugfest and they expended all their energy to get through that series, they just didn't quite have 100% for Dallas. And ultimately, I think that was the little margins, especially in those early games against Dallas, that swung that series, I feel like.
So, like, could have they approached it differently, or like, you know, in hindsight, do you keep more in the tank?
I don't think
it also
so. I
feels
mean,
like they needed that.
You are the team that you are, right?
Yeah,
you have to play to your strengths. Their strength, their strength was being a great defensive team, and this is how they had to play it. Right. You know, I think looking back on it, you know, I think if you're them, you just kind of wish that you were able to not lose both game 3 and 4 at home of that Denver series. Right. And maybe it's a different series if you're going back to Denver for game 5 up 3-1 at that point, you know, and then maybe you're able to close that series out a little earlier and get a little more juice back before you play Dallas. Right. I think that's probably the one regret that they might have about last season was you're up 2-0 coming home against Denver and not winning one of those games was probably where they lost ultimately in the next round.
It was a bizarre thing in the play. I was like kind of toying around with this as one of mine, but I didn't really know how to put it. But like how great the playoffs were. I mean, best playoffs in franchise history, maybe, you know? Yeah. They sure lost a lot at home in that time, you know? That was a funky that was a funky thing of like, and it was like the Dallas one, they like lost by a lot. And all the fans are just like on cloud 9 because I wasn't it? I think they won more games on the road in the playoffs last year than they did at home, which is nuts.
They did. You know, the Denver series, they went 1-2 at home and 3-1 on the road in the Denver series, and the only game they won in the Dallas series was on the road, game 4. Yeah. So they were, you know, between the Denver and Dallas series, they were 1-6. Or 1-5, no, 1-5, 1-5 at home in the Denver and Dallas series in the playoffs. Yeah,
I mean that's ridiculous. That's like not normal.
You don't see that, right? You don't see that. So I that's what I remember about the defense, the nightly energy, and it's a very admirable quality that they have, and I think this team has it a little bit too. To segue into this year, I think that they come out and play with the requisite energy. And focus. It took them a while to get to this point, but I think they've gotten there. Yeah. And we'll see how that holds up as their travel schedule increases. Because man, I was booking some flights last night and looking at the schedule, and I'm like, oh geez, this is a beast of a road trip. So there's going to be a lot of that coming up in future weeks.
Yeah. Give me let's rattle through a couple more.
I think I'm on to my last one. Yeah. Or no, I have two more. I mean, I'm just going to go with the cat trade, and taking us.
Sure.
And not by surprise. I tell people this, not by surprise in that it happened, because we had been talking about this and speculating about this for 2 years, right? But the timing of it was what was most surprising. The fact that it happens on the eve of training camp, while I'm at the Carole King musical for the final time. Chanhassen Dinner Theater. Open up my phone at intermission and have to spend the second act in the lobby making phone calls and doing things like that. The timing of it was the most surprising thing about unexpected. And just the way it all went down. And then a few weeks later, they're playing them in the preseason at Madison Square Garden. And that was weird. I think for all involved, maybe even weirder than Cat coming back a few weeks ago to Minnesota, just because it had been just literally like
not long,
like maybe 2 weeks, if that, before.
Well, Randall hadn't even played a game yet, right?
Randall hadn't even played a preseason game yet. Yeah, exactly. They were just getting there, and then so here's Carl coming out against his old team in New York, and yeah, it was a surreal couple of weeks, and adjusting to all of that, and I give Carl a lot of credit just personally, because he had agreed. We had been in communication before training camp about him talking for the book.
Sure.
And I didn't know after the trade if that was still going to be a thing. But he stuck to his his word, and he spoke for the book on the eve of the regular season starting. And we were able to get a phone call. So, I credit him with kind of sticking to his commitment to, wanting to talk for it, even after circumstances had changed and everything in his life kind of turned upside down in that moment.
It was cool too when me and you went and talked to him after the game at Target Center a couple weeks ago, and he was just like really excited to hear that you like finished the book, and that was good, and that was because it was weird. It's like one of those things where the trade happens, and it's just like immediately, and you gotta, for us, you gotta be writing the stories, you gotta be doing the stuff. We gotta start to understand like who DiVincenzo is, who Randall is, what is the salary cap stuff. You kind of get consumed in the immediacy of it, and the season is about to start and all that. And then, in ways for me, it didn't even become very real until seeing Carl and, like talking to him in Minnesota a couple weeks ago, because I don't think people understand how often we interviewed Carl. Maybe you do, but there's just, and he was always willing to do it, and for many years and through many losing streaks, like we would do an 8 to 10 minute interview session with Carl after like every single game. And obviously you guys have like a good professional relationship in that way, and I have a professional relationship with him too. It's not like we're like buddies or something like that, but it was to me, that's what stood out. Like on a personal level, it was like, oh yeah, like he's not here anymore, and and he was the same guy, when we talked to him a couple of weeks ago. It's just like the same guy. And because that trade is, I don't even have my head wrapped around it yet. It's just like big on so many different levels, right? Like it is huge basketball, and a story that's still like kind of being written, We'll circle back to it in 2025.
I think we'll talk a little more about that.
You think so? You think it'll come up?
But to your point about interviewing him, and it's not even just interviewing him, even on days where we didn't interview him. Just seeing him in the locker room, saying what's up, saying hello, seeing him at a practice or shoot around, those are the things that and the conversations you have off the record, about just various things and life and whatever, always definitely, just on a personal level, miss that presence in the locker room. He was always great to be around, for sure.
No, I miss that too. And and for me, the only player like I feel like ever I really had like that. It was just so many years. We both covered him for 7 years. It's a lot of a lot of that time is very, very different. And we're happy for the success that he's that he's finding on his individual level there with the Knicks. Okay, I had one more I wanted to. Oh my God, I'm forgetting which one. I have like a bunch of them that I had down. I did have Cat's 62-point game, but that doesn't flow well into what you just said. So let's skip that one. Nickeil Alexander Walker's season last year. I think that's
there we go.
That kind of gets that dude got no respect in free agency, 2023 free agency. He showed some in his time against the Wolves and what he did in that that first playoff series against Denver that they lost, starting guarding Jamal Murray, all that. Then he still goes out and signs a 2-year, $9 million contract, which is like, that's the rest of the league being like, we don't believe you're any, that's a, all right, maybe a guy we'll keep on the end of our bench. You're kind of young still. You were a first round pick.
I think he signed for less annually than what his qualifying offer would have been, right? Like,
probably
on a per year basis,
yeah, because it was like 4.5. Yeah, it's like nothing. And I just was blown away that nobody. I mean, in the Wolves, they needed to be managing their cap and stuff, so they let the market play out, and that was his market, and it was just like, I was shocked. It was that low. And then he went out and just had such a great, season and was proved to be so much more than that. And I love, that's kind of like the Naz thing. It's like these guys just proving that they are so much more than their perception. Those are the coolest guys to write about, talk about, to watch grow. And he's somebody, you in particular have a really good relationship with him, but just like a good dude. And, it's one of those people when the Shams tweet comes through of what his next contract is. Hopefully it's with the Wolves, but whatever it is, and it's a big fat number. Yeah. That's going to be one of those where I'm like, okay, Nickeil, and you turned your career around, and you proved to yourself that you are to the world that you're a very valuable person. I was kind of scrolling through. I was like, yeah, man, Nickeil was a huge part of the 2024 Wolves. Even if there wasn't like one specific moment or thing that we could point to. I wanted to shout him out.
Yeah, no, all the things that we just said about Carl in terms of like, his presence in the locker room, the way he is, like, that's Nickeil. And especially on the road, he's always one of my just kind of favorite people to just interact with and talk to from the moment he got here, and I saw him reading books at his locker. I'm like, interesting. I was like,
this is my guy.
I was like, let's ask about this. And then that led to a fun story that we did last year.
Really good.
And he's just always a super thoughtful, good dude, seemingly, and it's been a joy to cover for the last couple of seasons, and to see him really come from, I remember those first couple of games, like thinking like, yeah, this guy's the throw-in in the trade. Is he ever going to see time in the rotation? I remember asking Finch early on about that. He's like, Nickeil's going to get his chance. Like, Nickeil's going to get an opportunity here, and he stuck to that word. And Nickeil, from the moment he got in the rotation, has never left it.
Yeah.
And he really took his opportunity and just ran with it. And the door did open that year, because obviously they had Naz got hurt late in the season, and then Jaden was out for the postseason. So it opened the door for rotation minutes in the playoffs, and he acquitted himself well. And I think Nickeil's contract is something that Jace likes to maybe say a lot about, which is that how much do people around the league really watch the games, right? Because how do you not watch what he did in that postseason and be like, we
$5 million, right? Like, it wasn't like
we can use that for $5 million, right? Or whatever, right? So, I think people are watching now, and I don't think that's going to be the case after this season. I think it's going to be more so what the market and the way the aprons all intersect with the mid-level exceptions, and who's got it and who doesn't, and who's willing to spend it and who doesn't. There's a lot of complications for that middle class of NBA players, so to speak, because of the aprons. But Nickeil has proven that he should be in the league for a very long time, and to think about where he came from 2 years ago, that is quite a statement for what he's done with his career here in Minnesota.
I think, and I wonder if maybe he did have other similar offers that maybe even like slightly more or more, because I remember Naz had those. Remember Naz had
True.
offers
Yeah,
that were
Nas
for
had
like
other
more
offers.
years.
Yeah.
But because when you're like kind of getting out of the mud, you appreciate the mud that you're like coming from, or I don't know, or it feels safe and comfortable. And I think Nas wanted to continue going. I would assume, particularly with like the Finch presence, if he wanted to have, if he wanted to stay too, and was kind of like, okay, I'll sign this 2-year thing. I never heard anything about that, but I was always just remember being shocked about how low of a number that was, and yeah, just kind of what he's done to show that he's going to be worth a lot more.
It shows you that even if you do have maybe a little more money on the table somewhere, that the situation and the fit,
For sure.
and the organization that you play for matters, especially as you look down the road at what maybe you will be getting on your next contract.
Totally, dude. What if he would have signed with a team where they're like, yeah, we're gonna actually have you be a point guard,
right?
Which would have been,
or they just, and then he just gets buried on the depth chart or whatever, right? Like, could very conceivably have happened, and that can easily happen.
Yeah.
So
kind of like Shake Milton, like when Shake Milton signed here, but if he would have done that else, and it just wasn't a good fit for Shake, and now look at Shake's since Minnesota, now been on Detroit, Brooklyn, and the Lakers. Like he's bounced around. I think it's really important for that like quote unquote level of player, or their market level of player, to like get in a place where that you can have an opportunity and the right opportunity. And I think the Wolves have done Nikhil a real solid in that regard too. So I wanted to mention that one.
His story does not happen often in the NBA. That what Nikhil has done is rare.
Yeah.
And kudos to him for making it work.
You want to plug the newsletter? I saw you tweeting about that this morning.
Yeah, and actually kind of leads into my last moment, which was just the moment the other night in Atlanta with Ant's grandfather. And so I wrote about this in our newsletter, which you could sign up for. Go to my Twitter account, Blue Sky account. I have the link there that I posted this morning. So I don't know if you get it in time for this week's newsletter, but
good example of what it is, though. Yeah.
Good example of what it is the Tales from the Beat. This week is about Ant's grandfather showing up in Atlanta for the first time in Ant's NBA career, seeing him play in person. And I'll spoil it a little bit. Actually, the book kind of had a part in this. So the way it happened was Ant's grandfather, Ben, he came with this guy who you see in some of the videos with Ant, a guy named Dana Watkins. And Dana was kind of the guy who kind of took me around Ant's young life in Atlanta. He introduced me this summer to a lot of different people in Ant's life, like youth football coaches. And his son played AAU basketball and football with Ant. I met his son. I met some of his friends. So Dana is the guy that Ant kind of embraces in the video before he sees his grandfather.
Yeah.
I think he's in a black jacket. And so this summer, Dana and I were driving around Ant's old neighborhoods, and we drove by his grandmother's house, and his grandfather was just sitting on the porch. Huh. So we get out and talk to his grandfather for like maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. And I interviewed Ben for the book for about 10, 15 minutes. And during the course of the conversation, Dana says to Ben basically like, hey, next time Ant's in Atlanta, if you want to go to the game, I'll come pick you up. We'll go get I'll get you seats. We'll get it taken care of, and we'll get you out there to see Ant play. And from that day onward, they stayed in touch, and Ben took him up on that offer eventually.
That's awesome.
And that's kind of how it came together. The two of them reconnecting and staying in touch since that day in August. And Dana was telling me that Ben was calling him all week, like, what time do I need to be ready? You know, what time are you going to come by? You know, what should I wear? You know, all that stuff, right? So he was very excited all week leading up to it, to go, and it was a cool moment to see happen for sure.
No, I think it was. I didn't know all that, and so shout out to you for being a connection to that. But I think for people this season, that's kind of seeing that moment, whether it was from you or from the team's coverage. Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of journalism is like highlighting the parts that we don't get to, that you don't get to see just from watching somebody play basketball or, interview them about basketball. And obviously your book is going to be all of that on AMP. But that was a really cool moment. And again, you guys, this is a free newsletter for the Star Tribune.
You don't have to subscribe. Yeah.
Yeah. So go to Chris's go to Chris's Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever, Star Tribune, and sign up for that, because one, it's an important thing. Star Tribune wants you to get an idea of what Chris's coverage is like, but it's a free way to do it. And we know everybody's got a lot of subscriptions and stuff like that these days, and so sometimes having a good free way in teaches you what it's actually going to be. I've been enjoying reading them from Chris, and I really think you guys will too. And that's a great way to kind of round this one up. It was a fun 2024 for me. Chris, you're a big part of my 2024 and this job. It's we're not directly co-workers, but it feels like it, and it's cool to have this whole list of stuff I have right here that I'm just kind of like thinking, writing down, like, yeah, man, we were me, you, John, Jace, Britt, like we were there for pretty much all of it, and it was a hell of a year. We had a lot of the early 2020s, not as much so that way, but 2024 was really, really fun.
I think what you appreciate about last year's team, and I definitely tried to enjoy it in the moment. Teams like that and moments like that, seasons like that, do not come often. Right. In the course of this business and even sports fandom, right? And I always tried to, like, from the locker room and the players that you dealt with on a day-to-day basis to the fan base and their appreciation for the team, and just the overall feeling of covering the team every day, the playoffs, all of it was just a lot of fun. I tried to cherish it a lot, and I feel like I did, and take advantage of it, because then the team makes a trade in the off season, and it ain't the same anymore. It ain't the same after that. It's a different thing. So you have to cherish those moments when they do come.
That's a great way to wrap it up. He's Christopher Hine. You can follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine, Blue Sky as well. Coming up next on the show, obviously the Wolves play the Thunder tonight. Two awesome games here coming up, Thunder and Celtics. Britt and I will talk about whatever goes down tonight in the Thunder game on Wednesday afternoon. We're going to do that in the afternoon, so it'll come out a little bit later than you're used to. Pods coming out at probably come out about 3 or 4 o'clock on Wednesday, and we'll talk about the Celtics game, the Celtics matchup a little bit there too. They play the Celtics at 6:30 on Thursday night, and then Kyle and I will talk about that on Friday. Looking forward to a good week of hoops. Until Wednesday with Britt. He's Chris, I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards